Notre Dame, Georgia, facing off in the Sugar Bowl at the Caesars Superdome in New Orleans, Louisiana. It's going down New Year's Day, 8:45 p.m. This is a late game we've got here. The over-under has ticked up just a hair to 45 and a half. We started 43 and a half, stayed at 44 and a half there for a couple of days, and now, as I said, ticked up to 45 and a half. Which running game can get it going, Mason? I think that's what this one boils down to. And to be quite honest with you, Mason, most of these playoff games and conference championship games, if you guys want to go back and look, um, check what I'm saying, check it for accuracy, because literally, I think all but one of those games so far, the team that's ran the ball better has won those games. The one of the exceptions I know for a fact was Penn State ran all over Oregon, and Oregon had so much firepower that it wasn't enough, and were able to beat Penn State. But that game aside, I'm pretty sure every other conference championship game, every other playoff game, whoever won the Russian battle won these games. I think this is one of those games right here, Mason. I think that it's going to totally depend on how these defenses line up against these two offenses. We have all talked at nauseum about the Georgia quarterback situation. Carson Beck not only undergoing surgery, but he's declared for the NFL draft, all that stuff. He's leaving Georgia after this season. So thank you, Carson Beck, for everything that you've done for the Georgia Bulldogs and all that good stuff. But it's now the Gunnar Stockton era, and that era starts New Year's Day. And we talked about in our video earlier this week, and I think a lot of people appreciated it, kind of talking about Gunnar Stockton and who Gunnar Stockton is. So I encourage you to go back and kind of watch that. We kind of broke down where, as far as even where the name Gunnar Stockton came from. He's a Georgia boy through and through. Is basically the what we had came to the conclusion of. This is a guy that is so woven in the Georgia fibers and threads. It's not even funny. He's going to get his chance to be QB1 in the Sugar Bowl in the quarterfinals for the Georgia Bulldogs. Can Notre Dame put him in uncomfortable situations? And I know that is exactly what most Notre Dame fans are looking to do. They want to stop the run first and foremost, and they want to put this young quarterback who has very little experience in college. They want to put the ball in his hands and make him win it with his arm. And I think that is I think that's the best possible plan that you could have in this scenario. We don't know what we're going to get out of Gunnar Stockton in that situation. But for us to get to that scenario, Notre Dame has got to be able to stop Georgia's running attack. And it's a running attack that hasn't had a great year, but it really has seemed to come on as the year has went on. And in some of the biggest games of the year, Georgia has been able to run the football. And I think this is the healthiest the Georgia running back room has been in a little bit. So we'll see. We know Howard Cross has been injured, right? He played in the last game some, but Mason, you talked about it. We've talked about it some. He was hobbled, right? Riley Gaines out for the remainder of the playoffs. Big deal. Big number 99 on that defensive line. Senior guy who that defense relied upon a lot this year in run stop scenarios. So with those two injuries to two of your best defensive linemen, how do you match up against this Georgia run game? And on the other side of things, how does Georgia match up against this run game? We're going to look through some of the comments we've got from some of the Notre Dame fans this week, and they make some good points, Mason. And I'll just go ahead and throw one up on the screen real quick since we're on the discussion right now. The question, and that's not it. That's from the Texas game there. Let's see. That's not it. I got one in mind here. If I can find it. But it was a Notre Dame. I guess I can't find it. It was a Notre Dame fan talking about how Georgia's had the ball ran on them this year, and Georgia Tech was able to do it. Even a lowly team like UMass was able to do it. And that is true. Georgia has given up some yards this year. Georgia has given up more points this year than they've given up in years past. But Mason, this was a really tough schedule. This is one of the toughest schedules in the country that Georgia played, and in the really big games, Georgia's done pretty good against the run, specifically against Texas. Do you think this is a big day for the Notre Dame run attack? Because if Notre Dame looks to win this football game, it's going to have to be. It's going to have to be because I don't see this Notre Dame offense hitting a bunch of pop shots over the top of this defense. That's just not their game. That's not Riley Leonard, and for the most part, that's not been this wide receiver core. Gonna have to watch out for Faison. He's fast as lightning and he'll run past you. But beyond that, Mason, it's not been an offense that's really aired it out. Um, do you think this running attack is going to be able to move the football against a Georgia defense that historically has showed up in these types of games?
Yeah, and I think that the last point that you make there is the difference in what we've seen from Georgia through most of the season versus what we're going to see on Wednesday night, right? Georgia shows up in these big matchups defensively. They show up against the run in particular, right? They're probably going to give up some plays through the air, and very well could. I mean, I'm not saying Notre Dame has no chance at running the football. They're a very good running football team, and I do think that they'll give up. Georgia will give up some yards to them in some ways, but Kirby and this defense, Glenn Schumann as the defensive coordinator, they do a great job of not tipping their hand through the rest of the regular season. And then when the time comes, when the moment comes to play football and they get tested, they feel as though they get tested with a football team that's kind of worth their merit. Georgia tends to show up, and I don't have any sort of expert analysis as to why that is. The only thing that I can think of is that they play kind of a vanilla style of defense until they need to pull out some of the different blitz packages and uh, basically kind of throw everything at the opposing offense, everything but the kitchen sink that is, and I think you'll continue to see that for this Georgia team defensively for Notre Dame. I think you see a lot of similarities, right, to Georgia when you look at what they are. They're very physical. They play the pass well. They play the run well. Um, I don't think that either team is going to have a ton of success running the football, Mark, and that's kind of where I'm getting at here. If the run game's not working for these offenses, who's got the advantage passing the football? Because there are a lot of unknowns about Gunnar Stockton, and we talked a ton about it in our last preview, probably more than we should have talked about Gunnar Stockton, if I'm honest. But it seemed like you guys enjoyed sort of an insider view at who Gunnar Stockton was as a high schooler. And if you didn't get a chance to watch that, I'll invite you to go back and watch that video. But to me, there with so many unknowns behind Gunnar Stockton, it makes it very cloudy to figure out who has the advantage here as a passing team. These teams are really built very similar, offensively and defensively, and just as programs, especially when Carson Beck is absent. He's obviously not going to play in this football game. He's just had surgery. So when I compare Gunnar Stockton to Riley Leonard, obviously I've got to give Riley Leonard the edge because of the unknowns with Stockton and his game, but I think that they are very similar as quarterbacks. Um, However, we don't know that. I'm speculating based on what little information I have of Gunnar, and we haven't seen an offense built around his game and his style of play. What we saw was Gunnar playing under Carson Beck's playbook and Mike Bobo picking out plays that he thought Gunnar would fit in, a lot of quarterback draw and things like that. Now they've had 3 weeks to build an offensive game plan around Gunnar. What do we see here, right? And there's just so many unknowns. It makes it really hard to break this game down. But I know defensively for Georgia, I do feel confident in saying that they're not going to give up 300 yards on the ground, right? I don't think that they give up 200 yards on the ground in this football game. Um, but can Notre Dame have some success running the football against Georgia? Absolutely. I give Georgia a slight edge for their rushing abilities, just mainly because of the injury, like you said, to Gaines on the defensive line. And the fact that I still don't think that Howard Cross is 100%. I think he's probably closer to 70%, if I'm honest. It seems like he is still kind of limping around when he's out there, but he is a game wrecker if he's healthy. If he's healthy in this football game, it completely changes my opinion on the ability to run the football for Georgia. But knowing what I saw out of the past week, I have to lean Georgia winning the rushing attack in this football game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up some really good points and something that we kind of talked on some earlier last week whenever we discussed this matchup. This offense, more so than I've ever seen as a Georgia Bulldog fan, and I'll tell you right now, we're a couple of Bulldogs fans, but we try to just call it the best, how we see it, right? This Georgia offense has been built around Carson Beck. You're exactly right. It's been catered to fit Carson Beck and his play style. We don't know what we're going to see now. We are going to see some new wrinkles. We're going to see a different approach. I hope it's not too conservative. I think that it is going to be conservative, but Notre Dame would love to get Gunner into situations where it's obvious that he has to pass, and to be able to do that, it's going to have to happen on first and second down. And that goes for each of these defenses. What can you do on first and second down? That's going to depict how this game goes. Not to mention Georgia lost one of their best special teams players in this playoff, or I guess it was in the SEC championship. I guess it was, and their punter, right? And does that come into play because Georgia has had outstanding special teams over the last few years. When you lose a punter to an injury, which is just absolutely rare, right? Um, a season-ending injury at that, what does that do? I've heard from some Georgia fans that Georgia's ready and they've got somebody waiting in the wings, and that's all well and good. But what if you get backed up into your own red zone? And I mean, there's a reason that our starter was starting and the backup was the backup. So you take a step back in that position as well. And I think that that's something that's not really talked about a whole heck of a lot, going into this matchup. But special teams is going to play a big difference, especially when you're talking about two running attacks that are going against one another. Field position is going to be paramount. You're going to have to be able to flip the field. If you can't get 3 or 7 out of it, you got to at least pin your opponent back. Which one can do it more consistently? I think that that's going to be a big deal here. I think that that's a really, really big deal here. Um, and I think whoever can rush the ball better is definitely gonna win this game. Let's talk about some of the comments that we've seen on this one, as we typically do the second go round on these matchups. Let me make sure I'm on the first one here. Yeah. Um, G baby, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Obviously a Notre Dame fan, or I believe a Notre Dame fan. I don't think this was the one that I was looking for earlier, Mason. I don't think folks understand how bad of a matchup this is for Georgia. It's a reason why Alabama and Ole Miss beat them and Georgia Tech almost beating them. They all have the same thing in common. And, you know, I tend to agree with that in a sense. And I also don't agree with that in a sense. First of all, teams are healthier at certain times of the year. Teams are not healthy certain times of the year. And there's a couple of players you can point at for Georgia that weren't healthy in some of these situations that you're discussing here. And I think that it does have some type of outcome on the game. Georgia didn't get off the bus for the first half of the Alabama game, and it seems like a year ago now, but we all remember Georgia stormed back and took the lead with 2 minutes left in that game. So, um, you know, Georgia honestly should have beat Alabama in that game. Just to be honest with you, I mean, you got a lead with 2 minutes left. You should win it, and I think Georgia wins those matchups most of the time if they've got a lead with 2 minutes left, with the defense that Georgia typically puts on the field. Georgia Tech ran for a half. They sure did. They absolutely ran wild for a half. They threw all over Georgia for a half, but it wasn't enough. And I just don't, you know, either one of these teams, if Georgia comes out, and this brings up another point. Georgia hasn't played well in the first half, Mason, of these games. I mean, I've bet against Georgia in the first half of the majority of their games this season. That's been like my go-to, one of my wagons this year. betting on Georgia's opponent to cover their spread in the first half, whether they're underdogs or favorites, whatever. Typically underdogs because Georgia's not typically an underdog ever. Um, and it's cashed in for me over and over. If Georgia allows Notre Dame to get way out ahead in this game, I think Georgia plays with fire one too many times and it costs them here. If somebody gets way ahead, these two teams are not made to come back in games by more than a couple of possessions, maybe, right? I just don't see that being the case. But G Baby's got a good point. Georgia has given up some rush yards. We kind of addressed this already in the video, so we don't have to like rehash all that. But um, we both feel like Georgia has typically showed up in the big games where they've had to do it. I think Alabama game would be one of those games that you could say, yeah, they didn't really show up there in the first half, but for the most part, these big games, Georgia's defense has showed up and showed out, and it's been really tough to be able to rush to the extent that you're able to beat Georgia. Typically, it takes an NFL quarterback. I mean, that's just been what history has shown us. Typically, it takes an NFL wide receiver to get over the top. Um, I think Georgia has an opportunity to really, really load up the line of scrimmage here. Um, Holden Gamble, thanks for watching, Holden. I appreciate it. He says UGA will embarrass Notre Dame. They don't play a real football schedule. It's weak. They got scored on by a bad USC offense. I disagree with that. USC's offense was not bad. Um, they are going to get hit by real men in the trenches and realize really quick that they can't win. Anyone who has actually played football knows the difference. These are the types of comments that get people nice and riled up on the YouTube comment section, and I appreciate your input, Holden, for sure. Um, Matthew Diego commented back and said, "No, Georgia will win because Notre Dame doesn't have a good quarterback that can pass the ball. Notre Dame did rally well in the did really well in the trenches against A&M. They always produce good offensive linemen, and they list out several of those. And that's kind of where I'm at with this thing. I think it's got more to do with the fact, and I just mentioned it, that you've got to have a CJ Stroud or something like that to really stretch this Georgia defense out. And I feel like give yourself a chance to, if you're going to mollywop Georgia, I don't think either one of these teams gets out to some kind of big lead. I think this is a close one right to the end, Mason. I don't think this is more than one possession or maybe two. I think 10 being probably the biggest lead that we see this one in this one, or see one or the other win by. I don't think we got a blowout here because I don't think these two offenses have got it in them to run up a score in this matchup. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I agree with you. I don't necessarily agree with the comment here. I don't think that UGA is going to embarrass
No,
Notre Dame.
no.
This is a Kirby likes to play very conservative in these big games, and that's why you see Georgia um, come out in the first half and not take a lot of shots, and they're usually not winning in the first half or not up by a ton of points throughout this entire season. And you could really go back unless Georgia is scoring with their sort of vanilla standard offense. They're probably not going to be up very much in the first half. What Georgia has figured out, I think, is that they're really good at making first half adjustments, and they want to see, all right, what is this offense doing, right? And what adjustments can we make defensively to slow that down? And then the same thing can be said on the other side of the football. What is the defense showing us? What adjustments can we make to come out and score a bunch of points in the second half? Does that change offensively for Georgia without Carson Beck, knowing that they can play from behind, right? That's kind of a question for me. If you've got Gunnar Stockton playing, and I mean, if you get down 17 points, I don't know if Georgia's offense can come back from being down 17 points or three scores, whatever you want to call it. Um, with Carson Beck, we saw it, and we've seen Georgia come back in the second half and win football games with Carson Beck at quarterback. I'm kind of interested to see if the game plan changes for Georgia in the first half, knowing that they're going to need to score some points or at least stay within a score of this of this game in order for Gunnar Stockton to have a chance to come back in the second half. Just kind of interesting to think about. I do think it's going to be lower scoring. I do think that it's going to be a close game. Vegas is telling us it's going to be a close game with the line moving between Georgia and Notre Dame since it opened at Notre Dame, which Georgia is now 1.5 point favorite. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I do think I don't think that gap in this game is more than 10 points at any point. Um, I can see I can see 10 points being scored in each half total, and this total being under 30. I mean, that would not surprise me one bit, knowing the way that both of these defenses are playing, and the fact that if these teams are not running the football in this game, I think that they could struggle to pass the football as well, which leads me to an under, for the total here. That's probably the safest bet that I have in this game.
I got Georgia winning, covering, and I got the under in this one, Mason. I think Georgia wins this thing 20-17. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I like the score prediction there. I think 3 points is probably about right. 3 to 6 points. I'll go 20-14 Georgia.
There you have it, folks. Y'all come and join us after the game. We'll be here on the First and Long College Football Show channel here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.